The theme of this series is to disrupt some of the certainty that I observe people have around these topics, or at least that these topics might be familiar, especially this one on spectatorship. But what we're trying to do is deconstruct a little bit, think about it differently so that we can gain clarity. And so we're trying to bring a new perspective, not have it all fleshed out, but to give us different ways of thinking about some of these topics.
Yeah, the obvious one, spectatorship versus participation. There's some surface examples like, being in sports versus watching pro sports. Why is spectatorship a potential issue?
Off the top, we are a society of spectacle, a kind of relational tourists. We're tourists of love, we're tourists of experience. And this is when we substitute being for watching. And we bypass real risk and real skin in the game, real emotional material. And life ultimately shouldn't be theater. It has to be lived. And it's not a place of sentimentality or entertainment. This kind of goes with another one of our topics on substitution and how I believe people self medicate through all different kinds of things and substitute meaningful things in place of less meaningful things because it's easier and quicker. But definitely, our culture self medicates through spectatorship and tourism and consistently making ourselves spectators of our own emotions. If we're only an observer, there's a subject or an object. But as a participant, there is being. If an object is what you have and a subject is the person who knows, being is how you are. We move from object to subject to being is a move from possession and reflection into participation. Being the subject is a place where we do have agency, but it's still a place of self observation. And that is good. Like, nothing is wrong with this. But really, what we want is move into being, a place of deeper presence where we're not identifying, we're living it, we're just being it.
Yeah. I like when you said having skin in the game and also the risk required to get on the stage or in the ring. I know from my perspective, getting feedback from someone who isn't trying to do something new or innovative is like, really appreciate that. It's really different getting feedback from somebody on the outside than it is somebody who's side by side, lockstep, participating in the same kinds of missions that we're up to.
Yeah, and there's a popular quote that Roosevelt had that Brene Brown has made popular. I'll just read it. It's not the critic who counts. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. If he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly. And it's this idea of if you're not in it, sweating and, putting your life at risk. And if you're just an observer, as a critic is, then we don't want your fucking feedback or your criticism. You get in here and you do it and then talk to us about it. And that's a pretty popular sentiment these days. But the question that I have is, are we really being inspired to do anything different? Or do we like that emotion that comes from certain quotes? And is this a kind of substitution where we can take this idea and this insight and we can identify it without actually being different? And that is the conversation. The first place that I'd like to tie it to is human decision intelligence. That if we are only observing, there's a limited amount of data, and then that data is less credible. So it's limited and less credible because it hasn't been experienced. And it's not that all data needs to be experienced, but there are these places where we can't quantify outside of an experience. That if we're making an observation and collecting data from a very distanced position, it is just less comprehensive and in many ways becomes less credible. How we bypass some of the intelligence and we substitute something less intelligent than what we could have through actually being in it. And just to give a couple examples, I don't know, I guess a good way to call it is slide deck theater, where leaders watch KPI dashboards and celebrate. I mean, I don't even like the term North Star, right? Because it's been so overused as like, this is our definable, unshakable place. But then, they never really leave their offices or really get down in the front line reality with their people. So they're creating all these dashboards and these metrics, but they're not the ones that are actually dealing with it in real time or connecting with the people who are, even if they maybe have in the past. Human decision intelligence really thrives on situated data, and it merges statistical indicators with very tacit knowledge, like something that we experience. What's going on in real time? What is the stress? What are the pressures? How is everybody communicating about it? Like, what's happening? That kind of knowledge that's only available through presence. And so this is a distinction.
It reminds me of the quarterback who's under pressure, about to need to execute a third down, 10 plus yards, let's say. And we can all see on TV, like, okay, the play is coming in, the offensive line is lining up. But what we can't hear is just how loud the stadium is and how the QB might not be able to hear the play coming through their helmet. Like, this is why you always see, QBs going like this. They're trying to push the speaker to their ear. And so these are the kinds of contexts that we can't see from outside that have a huge impact on the person who needs to execute when it comes to how firsthand experience and participation versus spectatorship relates to human decision intelligence, is that you want to collect as rich data as possible.
Yeah. Another example is like when there's smart city hackathons or these kind of ethical climate index funds where you have these civic and moral tourists brainstorming apps and creating index funds, but then they just fly home or tweet victories from a distance. And so when we have a deeper participation, it shifts our models for people to modeling with people. And it reduces the model reality gaps, and this is something that human decision intelligence is all about, is, okay, we can make certain decisions outside of a participation, but how does that actually work, in realities? And this is a huge obstacle and problem that is consistent in humanity. And it's because you have people in a position to brainstorm or innovate, but they're doing it separate. And so I think that's one huge distinction in a word, like a key word, is the kind of separation that occurs in spectatorship. That a spectacle is the actual material expression of separation.
As I think about dropping down into being spectators of our own lives, it makes me think about the time when you sit down to dinner, whether it's at home or restaurant, and it's like phone eats first. You're taking pictures of your food, going to post it on social media. And there's this way that you drop out of the true experience of having a meal or connecting with the person sitting across from you, or even just connecting with the colors and the different senses of the food. And all of a sudden, you're almost like an outsider to your own experience. And this is where, you mentioned like the tweeting, where it's like, you're no longer actually experiencing that meal. You are observing it in a way that can be blasted in some other arena.
Yeah. When we speak about faith and hope and courage, all of those must be lived, not just mentally accounted for. And we have learned to become a kind of spectator to our own emotions. As you just said, like in our experiences, we see an experience, but in a distanced, separated, disassociative way. And if we're really embodying ourselves, it's a place where our emotions, if we're really connected to them and we're not just merely observing them, we're forced to look at the incoherence of the world and the void. And that's a rich place of information. And I think that increases the appropriate stakes. It makes us flesh, right? We're not a machine anymore that's observing our emotional states, that observing the emotional states of others. We're not merely noticing data, even though, yes, that's very important. We're somehow living that data. And that keeps us from being too separated from ourselves or other. And this is something that is so important to human decision intelligence. It's the reason why we do what we do, is to help humans become more human in a world that is training us to become more like machines. And we're not noticing that this is happening. It's very slow that what we make makes us. So our tools that we have made, and they're very powerful and awesome, and we love it. We're very pro-tech. But how those tools can then make us. And we really are better when we're not like machines. And so this is the place where participation, not spectatorship, where people have an ownership and an accountability and consequence in a way that can help us engage our humanity and embody the information and data that we have and that we are.
Yeah, there's a simple and kind of silly metaphor, but to keep going with sitting down at dinner, just because it is so prevalent that people photograph and post pictures of their food,
Mhm.
is the question to follow that up would be, what did it taste like? And to be able to hear, can someone describe the experience of embodying food, right? Like how filling it was versus only the external factors like the color, the shape, the garnish, these things that we can post.
Embodiment is a huge part of our work, is how do we become? It's less about the decisions that one makes and more about the decision maker. And obviously the decisions that we make are better and more intelligent when it is passed through and embodied by a decision maker. And this is a little bit abstract, but it's so much of what we intuitively know, that who we are is the result of what we do. Who we are is the result of how we act and how we think.
It's great to be a participant both in the risk taking, the potential failure and cost of being on the front lines when risks are taken, but also in the celebration. So, like coaching a softball team or a little league team, it's one thing to be a parent cheering in the stands, but when you have been watching the kids develop and giving them feedback and becoming invested in the outcome of these games, so to be able to celebrate a win as a participant is completely different. What is happening with our society and the way that we've become spectators in the arena of politics?
An ancient place of evaluating spectatorship is in politics. I don't necessarily want to have a deep conversation because politics is beyond our scope of expertise, but it is a place of humanity, and everything in some ways is politics. And so if we have been shaped by societies in the past, even before technology arrived, to be spectators. Now that in the fourth industrial revolution, and now that we have very advanced technology that allows us to remain spectators, even though we have probably always had this tendency as humans, because it's a place where we don't have to risk as much, or we don't win as much, but we don't lose as much. And it's a place where we can maintain our comfort and a place where we can maintain anger. The conversation that we're having as the Center of Human Decision Intelligence is much more around our conditioning as humans and how our society in the past and the present has conditioned us to be so. There's positive conditioning and there's negative conditioning. And we're really looking at the negative conditioning, like the idea of being tourists. What is it to be a tourist in a way where we visit places temporarily and where we do not set up our lives with any permanence or with any foundational commitment? And so I think that a part of being a society of spectators, beyond what's already been said, is there's this lack of commitment. There's a lack of desire to do the work that certain places of our humanity demand, like particularly in love, right? But even socially, we have these ideas and these ideals of the things that we want most, which is intimacy. We talk about this all the time, intimacy and innovation. But if one isn't really willing to develop the skills and capacity and desire to be truly innovators, or to engage in the acts and being that intimacy requires, we're fractionating ourselves and we're being demanding children who want to have all the benefits of innovation and intimacy and community without putting in the work. And that fundamentally fails, never mind really separates us from each other.
An example that I just came across over the weekend is I've been in Barcelona for 3 months and I was having brunch with a few other expats, and they were talking about how they're not at all integrated into the community and they've been here for over 4 years, and naming all of the reasons why, their role in the university and the neighborhood that they live in. And it was shocking to me and saddened me because they were pointing to the downside, which is the outsiderness. Like they're not connected. They're not experiencing Barcelona and the community and the town that they live in as, I mean, not that they'll be a local necessarily, but integrated in a way. And I do think it's the discomfort that it requires to shop in the markets where the local people shop and speak the language and put yourself outside of the few neighborhoods where a ton of expats congregate.
Yeah, and that's a perfect metaphor for how people do their relationships. they'll stick around somebody for months and months, or have a proximity that isn't very integrated, that isn't very connected. And then they're kind of like just wondering why the results aren't there. Whatever they desire to have as a result of being in a relationship or being in a city or trying to have a community, it's like this expectation unconsciously that these things just arrive and they don't. And I
Yeah.
think that this concept around being a tourist and being an emotional tourist or whatever, it's that we've become consumers of narratives, consumers of data, consumers of a kind of feeling or sentiment, right? That isn't actually assimilated into who we are. And this simulates something. It simulates agency without actually requiring it. It's a bypassing mechanism that we talk about all over the place when we use the word substitution. It's a substitution in a way that outsources versus embodiment. So it outsources less intelligent information versus embodied decision loops, where one accepts uncertainty and incurs real costs and then gains more real feedback.
I would say there's another consumerism. It's the consumerism of experiences, where it feels like we've lived something because we've been a tourist passing through a season of life. And there's such a lack of permanence in the world that we live in.
Time isn't the condition for which we become a participant. We can be participating and have a 5-minute experience. It's the same as presence. How is one present in the moment? Although I think that when you combine all these variables and when there is a vaporous world because of our technology and how things are less permanent, then I think that compounds the places of spectatorship, is because people are less present if they know they're going to leave or if there's impermanence. But we shouldn't be. I mean, we can meet somebody for the first time and have a very brief encounter with a stranger and be incredibly present and fully embodied. Or we can really get to know these people and develop, lasting intimate relationships. So, what are the conditions? Is a good question. What are the conditions around what makes us become spectators or participant? What are the conditions that require us to be present? How does that look for individuals in different circumstances? And how do we help each other? How do we inspire one another? And I think in terms of business context, it's really difficult for most employees because they're not inspired by their company to actually be human. The companies are more and more demanding that people become like machines. And so, because of that, they're not getting the human elements of commitment and loyalty and sincerity and honesty. And so, I think that's an underlying thing that's going on, right? Is how we're conditioning ourselves through our businesses to be machines. So machines don't have loyalty. I mean, at least not yet anyway. You know what I mean? And if we're really wanting to invest in the humanity of ourselves, then our structures and our systems need to invest in the humanity first, at least with equal priority as our systems that are not human. This is why we think it's a valuable conversation. And in this context, like even thinking about business systems and financial systems, what we measure, the actual hard data, is great. But now what we're calling for, the invitation here, is to quantify emotional, social, and reputational stakes alongside our financial and whatever tangible data. So the invitation is to include more of the human information. And like also like in our corporations and in our society, to celebrate iterative, like in other words, it's not just one moment where someone has courage. It's how many times, how many attempts have there been? So not just first time wins, which is what our culture really amplifies, right? Or really celebrates. We don't even usually know about all of the failures, but as soon as you win, and especially if it's quickly, well, that is really celebrated. But what about the consecutive wins that maybe are less big or maybe they're just less visible? How we continue to show up in our humanity should be invested in as much as the particular moments, and also what we're measuring, how we're measuring the human parts of our world that are fundamentally not separated from the tangible, more standard data. And somehow, over the course of history, we've divorced our humanity from this kind of data. So now we need to return somehow to being more whole, more complete.
We talk a lot about building skills, capacity, and desire. And so I'm always interested in how all the things that you listed out that we're currently acting as more consumers towards can help us acquire new skills.
The place to start is attention. Where are we bringing attention to? And there is a journey here from what we observe, are we observing others, to then observing ourselves, and then to being, right? So observation is very important in terms of the processing of information and how we grow. We need to have the ability to observe, and it is the first place. But that isn't ever the last place. We also need to be. So, how can we recognize what's happening in any given moment and how we're separating ourselves, or how we might be separating ourselves to, in this instance, only being a spectator and only observing and not participating? So, attention is required, and then often patience, and then desire. You have to want to.
Is that something that's standing in the way? Is that it does require people to incur more risk, even though they may be in equal measure to the ability to have rewards and celebrations for wins?
Yeah, I mean, that is the basis of human decision intelligence, is how we sit with an individual in any particular circumstance and evaluate what are the costs and what are the benefits, and particularly the hidden costs and the hidden benefits. If we're choosing to be spectators, why and for how long? But in this conversation, we're not actually just talking about going and enjoying a concert here. We're talking about how we're being in the world for the majority of the time, and how we're being conditioned to lose that part of our humanity so that we're only being spectators and consumers of, versus creators and participants, which is the place of being. So this is the fundamental question and invitation: is, do we want to only be spectators? What is the cost of that? Which we've listed, is it means, oh, you're going to be more and more machine like, and you're going to have less and less skills and capacity and desire to engage the deepest place of human satisfaction, which is creation and intimacy with other people. This culture of spectatorship, we've lost connection, not just with ourselves, but with each other. So we are incredibly lonely and simultaneously full of anxiety. That is not a good position for humans to be in, to feel satisfied or fulfilled, or have the support even that we need to make it through life with less harm and more goodness. So many of these topics really go to the exact same place, the exact same place of what we're losing, what's the cost, and then how we're bypassing the work and energy and attention and all the things that are required to really receive what we want most. That's what we lose, is we lose connection and intimacy and fulfillment and our things that are most human that we're designed to do, which is create, and not create alone, at least not entirely. That is the place. And then in that place, how we make really less intelligent decisions, because we're not able to calculate these things, especially not long term.
Are we losing aspects of our personal individual agency and voice? And then on a collective, as this scales out, if we're a culture of spectatorship, what is this costing us?
Ultimately, it's this conditioning aspect where we're being conditioned to be like a machine in the ways that we're just run on algorithms, where we're not actually giving any thought outside of a particular conditioning. All of this is an invitation to wake up, get out of the matrix, right? We're plugged in and we don't even know we're plugged in. The idea is that, oh, the spectator is kind of like being plugged into the matrix, where we're not participants at all. We're living out the programming that we were given. And to some degree, that's okay, because, we are systems that have organization and that have predictable outcomes, that is kind of like natural organic programming. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about where we're absent from ourselves and we're unconsciously separating ourselves. So the idea here is to wake up to what reality is so that we have a choice. And I think that, to be fair to most people, I really believe that people have a basic awareness of this and they are choosing to be machines. I don't think that people don't have an awareness of this. I think that the majority of humanity is actually way more intelligent than we give each other credit for. I think the obstacle isn't the awareness, the obstacle is the disconnection to the cost. And that's why we always start with the void and what's absent. So many people have told us, why don't you start with the positive things? Because we don't know the positive without investigating the negative. We don't know the light without knowing the dark. We don't know the truth without knowing what deception is. This is an intentional inversion. We need to start with what is missing. We need to start with the void in order to understand the presence of. And so I think that people understand that they are full of anxiety and alone and probably know why. So the question is, what is it that's going to help inspire us to choose differently? And I think what that is a deep connection to the state of what they already know. Oh, here is the source of your aloneness and the source of your anxiety. Here's the cost of you making the same decision over and over and over to be a spectator in this example versus to be a participant. And here's what you could gain. You could get yourself out of some of these negative states by choosing something different. I think it's that as the connection to the cost and also the connection to the benefit. What is it that we really want as humans? We choose in many ways to be victims. How can we look at ourselves more honestly and use that as an inspiration to dig into our agency and to try making a different decision towards a more whole human selves, that it's located in being, not in consuming?